This screencast is going to start with the formation of NATO. So another effect of the Soviet blockade for the other allies to make it to Berlin, another effect of that blockade was the formation of NATO, which is the acronym for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. NATO was a collective security alliance formed between 10 nations, including the United States, Canada, and several Western European countries. In this alliance, these countries are forming as a defense against any potential Soviet aggression. So it's essentially a military alliance, just like we saw in World War I and World War II, but they're not attacking. It's more of a defense measure to say, if the Soviet Union is to act aggressively towards any one of us, we will all be in defense of that country who's being attacked. So making each country less of an individual target. Well, obviously, this is going to further anger Stalin, so he's going to want to form his own collective security alliance against NATO. So the cause, or the effect of the NATO creation is Stalin's going to create his own organization called the Warsaw Pact. And this is the same exact type of alliance between the Soviet Union and its satellite nations, but for Stalin instead. So it's the same. What I meant is it's the same type of alliance that was between like NATO, but for Stalin and his alliances, which are his satellite nations instead. So it's like Eastern Europe is Warsaw Pact, Western Europe and the U.S. and Canada is NATO. Okay, we're going to talk about for the rest of this screencast some examples of how the Cold War expanded into China and then also into Korea. So China had a civil war around this time in the late 40s, between communists under the leadership of Mao Zedong, that you see on the slide, and nationalists under the leader Chiang Kai-shek, which is also spelled on the screen. Cut off a little bit. If you have trouble with the letters, let me know tomorrow. So truly, in China, communism was more popular because even though Kai-shek was a nationalist, he was honestly more corrupt in his policies. We, of course, in the U.S. don't care about his corrupt policies because he's not a communist, so per the Red Scare and per containment, we're going to be in favor of the nationalist side, and we even try to give money to the nationalist side to keep the peace. But unfortunately, the communist side is going to win out in China, and China will officially fall to communism under Mao Zedong's leadership. So this kind of makes us look bad because it looks as if containment has failed, which only makes the fear of communism go even further. This is going to lead directly to our decision to get into the Korean War, which should kind of look, this picture on the screen should look familiar in terms of Douglas MacArthur, and we'll talk about why in a second. So kind of remember that Korea was conquered by Japan during World War II. It was one of those kind of countries that Japan had taken over. Japan was very aggressive in Asia. So when Japan lost the war, certain parts of Asia are going to be given to the Allies' control to oversee the rebuilding of. And in Korea's case, Korea was divided in half at the 38th parallel. And the Soviet Union was given control of the territory north of the 38th parallel, aka North Korea. And the Americans were given control and influence over the south of the 38th parallel, aka South Korea. And of course, this is creating very different Koreas. North Korea more communist, South Korea more democratic. Well, eventually, in the late 40s, both the U.S. and the Soviet Union withdrew their respective troops from their sides. So the Soviet Union and the U.S. left, but North Korea remained communist and South Korea remained democratic. Okay? Now, basically, North Korea will at this time choose on its own to invade South Korea in an effort to unite the country once again under complete communist rule. So North Korea trying to invade the South, which was democratic, and turn it communist, which, per containment, we do not want that to happen. Truman was convinced that keeping South Korea safe meant we needed to send troops to South Korea, and the United Nations did approve this, And Douglas MacArthur was given control as the general to lead a fight against the spread of communism and basically kick out the North Koreans out of South Korea and push them back into North Korea. Initially, there were no real gains on either side. There was kind of a stalemate, but eventually MacArthur is successful at pushing the North Koreans completely out of South Korea, and he wants to go further north. He wants to go after China. He knows that China, which if you look at the geography here, North Korea is and Korea in general is a peninsula that kind of comes off the Chinese mainland. So since China is communist, they're probably happy that North Korea is trying to unite Korea again under communism. So they're probably helping fund this fight for the North Koreans. And MacArthur wants to teach China a lesson and basically go invade China. He's getting some gumption here. Like, that's a bit risky. And he's very adamant about this. He's very stubborn. He asks again and again. He's determined to invade China. And Truman basically has no choice but to fire him for insubordination because he has clearly overstepped his bounds. So that's the dismissal of MacArthur. Basically, he just got too gutsy and wanted to go after China. Truman said no. He kept pushing, and Truman has to completely fire him. The fighting in North Korea officially ended in the early 50s, but no peace treaty was ever signed. And to this day, Korea still remains divided at the 38th parallel. North Korea is still communist, and South Korea is still democratic. So this is the first example of how the Cold War turned to a military battle, but notice it was never between us and the Soviet Union in this case. Please write down any questions you have, and I will see you all tomorrow.